mentioned last time that Rashi says in a number of places that Tcheles was Yarek, which simply means green. Others learned that it's Lav Dafka. Yarek could also include blue. We saw that Rashi at the end of Bracha says that the person's face when he's Choyle, it's Yarek, it's like Tcheles, which would sound like it's green. The problem with that is that the Gemara says that there was this counterfeit, fake way of making tchelis, which was making it out of kala ilon. So now, we come out according to Rashi that kala ilon is this indigo, which is a kala ilon pashtus, could produce a green color. Because if you're gonna try to imitate the tchelis, you cannot have a blue strings when everybody else, according to Rashi, has green. So obviously, and now the problem is that I was Mavar, somebody checked it up, and he said that in all the writings from the times of those times, it seems that the only way that they were able to get a green dye was they did two processes. What they did was they took something, a spice that was called saffron, and they dyed the wool yellow. And then they took the indigo, and they dyed it blue, so together, the blue and the green together would make it into green. But the indigo itself, it seems that it was able to make any shade of blue, or many shades of blue, but it didn't seem to be able to do a green. So you'd have to understand, if you learn the Rashi learns that it's green, Yarek means green, and we saw that it's before Yerushalmi that says that Tchelis Doimel Asavim, Asavim means grass, which is definitely green. You'd have to understand what would that mean, that there was a kala ilon that was a type of another dye which produced the same color. Maybe they did it with this murka, with this saffron, which was got a very expensive type of a spice, but maybe it was cheaper yet than Tchelis. We mentioned in the past that when you have the dye from the murex, it really is going to naturally dye any cloth, any wool. It's going to do it purple. It's not going to dye it blue. So how do they do blue? Today that's why Reb Herzog, one of his times was that he says we have basically a Messiah that besides a few that say that Tchelis is purple, we assume that it's blue. And if it's blue, there's no way to get the blue murex to be produced blue. So in the late 80s, and they say that really they found that people did it already in the 70s, maybe in the 40s, that people came up with they figured out how to get from the murex, how to get blue. And that was that we mentioned that in order to make the dye stick to the wool, you have to have it water soluble. The way to do that was that you take the dye, which is going to be purple, which is purple when you take it out, and it's exposed to the air, it's going to turn purple. So you have to reduce it to its clear state, which is yellow, which is to take out all the oxygen. Okay, so today they have chemicals that do that much quicker. In the old days they had different chemicals. It sounds like the Gemara says different ways that they used to take out the oxygen. It took them over a week to do it. They had to do it when there was the least amount of oxygen, so they closed the lid. They didn't have any sunlight, they say, because that also would expose them to sunlight or to oxygen would ruin the process. And so therefore, then they would reduce it. Now, after, let's say, a week or so, they would be a clearish, yellowish. They would dip in the wool. Now it's stuck. And then as soon as they take it out, it would start going back to its original state because of the oxygen. And so now, it would turn, if you leave it like that, it would be purple. So right at that moment, if you want to turn it blue, you have to, in its reduced state, when it's still yellow, you have to expose it to the sunlight. When you expose it to the sunlight, what happens is that the murex has two colors in it, really. There's the bromo and the indigo. Bromo is the red, indigo is the blue. And what the sunlight, the rays, what it does is it breaks off the bromine, and therefore that dissolves, and you're left with the indigo, which is blue, and they have a regular color of blue. Now there's two other ways that they figured out how to do it also. Besides just picking up the wool when it's still in its clear matzav to the sunlight, you could cook it at that moment also in very heat. Cook it in water, the wool, and it will never turn blue. It will not turn purple, it will turn blue. Or there's a third way they figured out how to do it and that is to steam it at a very extreme high temperatures. If you steam it right after you dye it, before it turns back to purple, then you steam it, so then it will break off the red, and you'll be left with blue. The Gemara says how to make the tchelis. The Gemara says, Amalei Abaye l'Rab Shmuel. We'll see that this is a very, very important component, which Rabbi Herzog and others, they all did away with the murex because there was no way that they were able to make blue out of it. In other words, the regular process of dyeing that they knew, but there was some little knetch, this thing that they figured out, either that you have to cook it or you have to expose it to the rays of the sun or to steam it. That was something that they just came out in the late 80s that they seem to have figured out. Now, the Gemara says, Amalei Abaye l'Rab Shmuel bar Rav Yehuda. How do you dye it? Amarlu ma'asin and dam chilazim. We bring the dam of the chilazim. V'samonim, and you bring samamonim. Now, Tosfos learns that the samamonim was mixed with the dam when they v'raminu la b'yayros. You would put it into a big pot, into a vat. And you boil it up. Rashi learns that the boiling, it sounds from Rashi that the boiling was done to the wool before you ever dyed it. In order for the wool to be able to be a mekabel, the dye, they used to put it into samonim and then clean it out and it would make some chemical reaction maybe in the wool, nothing to do with the tchelis. The dam of the chilazim was pure, they didn't use any samonim. Tosfos learns that the samamonim was mixed together with the dam tchelis, and then it says you put it into a vat, and then you boil it up. Vishakilna porta, and then you want to test it out to make sure that it's the right color, that you cooked long enough. Vishakilna porta bebeis, you take a eggshell, which was what you'd call today like a disposable plastic cup. They would take an eggshell, vitaminalu, and you would test it, you would taste it, you would put the little bit of, you take out from the vat a little bit of the dye, and you would test it with the udra, with a piece of wool. Vitaminalu, the udra, you take a little piece of wool and you stick it into that eggshell. Vishadinalu, and then you would have to throw it away. Lahu beis, you throw away the eggshell with the leftover dye, because if you're going to pour that back into the vat, then it's going to be a mara sheni. It's like considered like you dipped it in a second time when you're going to continue with the wool. V'kalina le'udra, and you have to burn up the wool that you just dyed to test because it wasn't done l'shma. So you see over here, the Gemara goes through the process, and it mentions nothing about exposing it to the sunlight, nothing to the cooking after the dye, after you tested it. It doesn't say anything about exposing it to the sun, nothing about steaming. So this is I think I heard from Rabbi Reisman. He says that if this was such a, when they take you down to their factory to do it, that's like the highlight of the thing, and they show you that if you leave it regular, it's purple. And they came up with this beautiful amtzah that you expose it to the sunlight. That's the only way to get tchelis. Otherwise, it's going to be purple. The Gemara mentions nothing about it. And it was done, we said, it was done very dark, they say. The scientists say that in those days, today they have chemicals that you could reduce it even in the light. But in the olden days, you needed the least oxygen, no sunlight, no nothing. It was done in a very dark room. And therefore, to say that in order to get the tchelis, as opposed to getting purple, you would have to expose it to the sun or cook it up at that time, doesn't say. It makes no mention about, which is itself a American kasha if the murex was the chilazim. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says that you would just put it into a shell and you just put the udra in, and you'd look at it and see if it turned blue or not. It doesn't say anything about afterwards having to cook it. So some of the supporters, they said no, it's a first Gemara that said that they were matim, they did boil it up, because it says you take the samamonim, take the dam of the chilazim, put it into a vat, and you cook it up. So you say you do cook it up. The problem is, it's clear in the Gemara, that cooking up was the original process of the reduction, when they wanted to get it from the purple, to get it to its clear state, so that now it could be water soluble and go into fasten itself to the wool. That's the point when they cooked it. But there's no mention whatsoever afterwards of cooking it, which would have been mentioned in the Gemara had it been the murex, which is a process that you would have to do. Now the Rajman feels that this was a very stark kasha on the murex.